Hello, and thank you for joining us. I am your host, Soulful Business and Leadership Coach Jeffrey Beede. This is episode 046. Our guest today knows a thing or two about facing challenges in life. John Beede has climbed to the top of the tallest mountain on every continent, including Mount Everest. More people have orbited in space than having climbed the tallest mountain on every continent. John is a global adventure, author, entrepreneur, humanitarian, and keynote speaker. In this episode, John shares how climbing mountains isn't just about making it to the top. It's developing a round-trip focus on the journey. Are we merely traveling through life, seeing what we think we see, and often stumbling to actually see the amazement and wonder? Or are we instead setting out with a vision to make the journey worthy of the trip? We learn that the journey is about building perspective, preparing the mind, maintaining the stamina to endure the journey. We discover how you can level up your resilience using strategies discovered at the top of the tallest mountains on every continent. Find out how you can better navigate that adventure today on The Light Inside. Do you struggle with maintaining your energy and mental focus throughout the day? I know I do. The folks at NeuroGum have always believed that the best version of ourselves starts with the mind. That's why they've dedicated the past 5 years to creating great tasting products that conveniently and effectively get us in the right state of mind at the right time. 4 simple, healthy, and thoughtfully curated ingredients and endless lab testing ensure you can reach the right state of mind safely and consistently. Every phase of their production is done intently to create the most effective product. NeuroGum products help shift your mindset with ease and flow. Their functional gum and mints are shortcuts to the ideal state of mind, delivering just the right amount of what you need to energize, calm, and focus your mind in the moment. So if you struggle to find the mental focus and energy throughout your day, try NeuroGum and Mints by visiting getneuro.com today. That's getneuro.com. Refresh your state of mind with Neuro. They get the mental game, helping you stay in the zone. Joining us is Global Adventurer and Mountaineer John Beede as we share this conversation discussing the life lessons he's learned having climbed Mount Everest. Hello, John, and thank you for joining us.
Jeff, how are you?
How are you today?
A second, I can't hear you. Let's try that again. It was my fault. This wasn't fully plugged in.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes the wire has to be plugged in for it to work.
Well, I am super stoked for this conversation with you today. A lot of different angles and a lot of different roads and pathways, trails and mountains we can climb.
Yeah, that's the right analogy, dude. Yes.
Yeah, I can relate a little bit. I've had some minor experience myself with some smaller peak climbing in comparison to some of your bold and noble journeys, conquering some of the greatest peaks out there.
Thank you. I'm excited as well.
I am too. I'd like to jump in a little bit.
Okay, cool.
And first,
are we using the video for anything or is this just audio?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. No, that works. It was mostly a question of, can I take my hat off? Because I didn't comb my hair this morning. So
feel free. I won't judge you because I'm sitting here and just basically kind of chilling out. I've got this fine, in-depth conversation to take and that I plan on checking out for the afternoon and having lunch with my fiance and my sisters.
What an amazing day. That's great.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I like that you have that checkout ability. Like that's a really rare quality in entrepreneurs. They're like, that's when I'm done and I'm going on to my thing.
It is. And to me, at 50 years, I just turned 50 last week.
You're a young 50.
I'm a young 50. Thank you. At 50 years of my life, I'm like, there is so much life to be had and explored.
Yeah.
To me, I've done the whole hustle. I've done that, been through it. I owned a restaurant for 5 years.
Nice.
24/7. You're chained to the dog.
Yeah.
16, 18-hour days is an average workday. I did that and checked that off my list and said, yeah, I did that, but I'm going back to having some room in my schedule again.
I love it. I love it.
There's a lot of life to live, and not all of that life to me. And there again, that's to me. My preference is not all of that life revolves around work or climbing some of those mountains. You know? I've been to the top and seen a lot of them.
I completely get that. I get that.
There again, what drives your purpose? What path in life do we each find value and meaning with ultimately? And that's up for us to determine from the inside out.
Hence the name of the podcast, Trademark Incorporated.
I want to jump in with that. That's what the whole premise was. What creates us from the inside out? So often we're looking from the outside and trying to pull it in. How do we shift that perspective? Get to the top of that mountain. Sometimes it takes going to the top of that mountain, right? To see what's up there and see what's behind.
Yeah.
I think that is a perfect point to jump into this conversation about climbing mountains today.
All right, let's do it.
There's so much to be had there. For me, that perspective, we always look at, we always are getting, I'm trying to do this new thing where I'm breaking patterns of habit that we've all, that often come into play in our lives. One of those things, from my perspective, is doing that general breakdown that creates a bias, saying everybody does any certain thing.
Flesh that out. There's more there. I can feel it. There's more there.
We can often get pulled into that as a generational pattern. I'm going to go to the big thing for me lately is this generational pattern that we try to form these connections of generalization, say, well, it's more relatable to other people if I say we all do it. We all do all these things we have in common. There are things throughout life that we have in common, but do we truthfully all do everything? Do we truthfully all do a certain thing? So it's just forming a more aligned awareness of those things.
Yeah.
A more aligned awareness of saying, well, yeah, we are all human, but we don't necessarily all do certain things. We might have a more aligned propensity to do those. So I'm trying to focus that back in just so you don't create those biases in life that can also become a gate that limits you.
I think to say that we all do anything is a mistake, but we all act on certain spectrums. One example would be like the usage of anger spectrum. Does it go inward or does it go outward? Well, we all experience some level of anger. The love spectrum. Do we hide our love or do we openly express our love? Do we have self-love or do we have love of others, or are we balanced in these things? I think we all kind of like flow between these extremes in these spectrums, right?
There again, let's dive into this show.
Oh, we didn't start already? I thought we had gone into it.
With that mindset. Yeah, we're it's a rolling start. Let's keep along the lines of that perspective that it is all about having that perspective of seeing things from that vision and view on the way up, from the top, from the way back down.
Let's do it. Yeah.
The way back down meaning a lot of different things. It's all, to me, about that journey. And so often, climbing mountains can feel like that journey simply to the top. The man who moves mountains begins by carrying away a small stone. Share with us a little bit about your experience with climbing mountains. You have climbed some of the greatest peaks in the world, Mount Everest being one of those. We so often look at that as a big bucket list goal, so many of us approach that dream or that vision to climb Mount Everest someday. Let's dive in. What got you started with your desires and experience to start climbing mountains?
Awesome question. I got started when I was 13 years old. I was thrown into a Boy Scout camp, and I knew nothing about climbing, nothing about outdoor survival or living in the snow and traveling along the ice. And I met this group of mentors, guys who were passionate about helping me become a better human being. They threw me right in as an instructor of rappelling, rock climbing, snow hiking, and whitewater canoeing. And so I learned all these skills within a week as a beginner in order to teach younger scouts that came along. And it was, they were pretty tame adventures in hindsight, but it was definitely trial by fire. That's what got me into it. And I live in Las Vegas. I was born and raised here. And there's a place called Red Rock Canyon, which is now an internationally renowned climbing area. But then nobody knew about it. or very few people knew about it because climbing wasn't nearly as big of a sport as it is now. And I would go out and establish a lot of these routes or climb up routes that are now established that weren't then. And I was just sketchy as could be. And I grew as a rock climber, but I realized that my legs were stronger than my arms. And so I started slowly shifting towards the mountaineering side of things, which is like on a fun scale. It's about the least fun thing you can do. A lot of people think it's like what we call type 2 fun. It's not fun in the moment.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun when you are at the pub later and telling stories about what you did, but it's only a good story if something went bad.
Oh my. Hey, there seems to me so many things that could potentially go south on a large scale, high adventure mountain climb.
There are.
Like Everest.
There are.
The pitfalls and perils. We so often hear the stories about those who don't make it back.
Right. There are 8 ways to die on Mount Everest. Some of them are pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, dehydration, heart attack, crevasse fall, exposure. And I went in with the idea. So I had climbed hundreds of mountains before trying Everest.
Yes.
I don't think it's a good idea for anyone to just show up and say, I'm ready for Everest. That's a mistake waiting to happen. Usually those who pass away are the beginners on those mountains, on big mountains. So I was ready. But my thought going in was if I can just avoid these mistakes that are proven to be the thing that end up as fatalities, there are 100 different ways to the summit.
Yes.
Maybe not 100, but I can take it on whichever days I want. I can go at my own pace, my own speed, as long as I can avoid these 8 pitfalls. And this is an analogy that plays into every area of life, like trading stocks. There are only a few ways to really go wrong in stock market trading. All you have to do is just not buy high and sell low, and don't try and time the market. Well, if you avoid those things, there's 1,000 different stocks or ways to invest that can make you a wealthy human being. And I think that same with marriage, same with friendships, same with work. Find the things that are the common pitfalls. Train and study to avoid those things. And then you have an open canvas of ways to succeed in front of you that can be totally up to your own creativity.
Yes. That reminds me of a great quote I read today while preparing. A trail through the mountains, if used, becomes a path in a short time. But if unused, becomes blocked by grass in an equally short time. What paths in life are we exploring on that journey in climbing that mountain, in forming that adventure?
And what paths are you forming for those who may come after you?
Yes.
What's the legacy that you're leaving by taking the steps that you take? Because that path is only meant for you. I mean, you forged the path on the way up sometimes, and then you trod it a little bit more on the way back down. We talked about the descent just a little bit, but that's your time there, and you get to either make it a better experience for others and a low impact experience. Like I went and saw Christmas lights yesterday, and we're driving down the street and we're in traffic, and I saw somebody just open up their car door and put their In-N-Out burger cup right down in the middle of the street. And I'm like, this person's just overlooking the fact that 100 cars are behind them in traffic that are now going to be driving over this plastic cup, and they're littering. And this is a small example of the path that we leave. You know, are you leaving it as a destructive place, or are you leaving a bigger impact than you have a right to, or are you cleaning it up as you go?
Yeah, removing all judgment from that, of course. Let's just
I'm judging that person. I'm not removing any judgment.
Okay. With that, we'll also take that with a grain of salt and say, but what did we leave behind? In this case, it was a lot of junk.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? The things that we hate most about others are usually the things that we hate most about ourselves in a different way.
Yeah.
So that is the question that gets then turned back onto me in that sense of judgment is, what are the things in my life where I'm leaving junk behind? Maybe not literal trash on a street, but where am I leaving debris that doesn't need to be there? Where am I cluttering and making an experience worse for others as a result?
That's a deep one to sit with today.
Yeah.
Thank you
That's
so
the only
much
place I go. I only go straight to the deep.
Yeah. Well, when you've climbed mountains, you've seen the depths. You've literally stood on top of the world and looked back to see it.
Right. Yeah.
How can you not have a forethought on that? You know, not to say a judgment or opinion, but just a simple forethought to look back and say, but I've been to the top of the world and I can see it.
There is certainly a level of perspective that you gain in tearing your own body down through this process of climbing. I mean, it takes 2 months to climb Mount Everest. So you're every single day waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning, pushing your body to its limits on a daily basis, and experiencing thinner and thinner air, so your brain doesn't have the same level of cognitive thought and processing, which to me puts you deeper into the spirit, into the inner strength that we all have. That's the only thing that you have to rely on any longer. And then motor skill, which you ideally have trained for. You're not able to consciously think about, how do I attach this Jumar, this ascender, to the rope? Like, that's a very simple task at sea level. Oh yeah, this clamp just goes over here, clamps down, and put the carabiner there. But when you're at 28,000 feet and you're 1,000 feet from the summit, you've climbed 2,000 already that day. It's 40 degrees below zero outside. That becomes a monumental task. And the only thing that gets you through each one of those steps and each one of those functions is how deep can you dig, and what is the baseline of your training that has led you to this moment. It's not what have you done on your best day. It's what have all of your days had in common as their baseline? And is it now natural motor function?
Share a little bit with our listeners, because, I can relate, but what are some of those hindrance points we experience when mountain climbing? Altitude being one of the big ones. About what altitude, from your experience, do we hit that cutoff point where we start to get into that edema, where we're starting to be starved for oxygen, our bodies start to interact, we start to lose some of our functionability?
Good question. So an edema is a swelling, and there's 3 types of mountain illness that are dangerous. The first one is AMS, or acute mountain sickness. That's kind of the baseline, the earliest one. And you can get that as low as 8,000 feet above sea level. And that's when you get kind of just dizziness, shortness of breath. You can get a headache. You can feel super dehydrated. Your body starts speeding up its internal processes, so you'll have to pee a lot. You may even feel a little bit nauseous. That's AMS. Pulmonary edema. Pulmonary is your lungs. So your lungs start swelling, and the lining of your capillaries in your lungs starts to shrink. What that does is it causes the reverse of, instead of oxygen going out, fluid starts seeping in from the rest of your body. And so you can drown on the side of a mountain because of this fluid coming into your lungs.
Yeah. That makes it relatable, right?
Cerebral edema. Cerebral is brain, just like Cerebro from X-Men.
Yeah.
I got to bring it back to the Xavier. So you're right, exactly. So when your brain swells, your brain will push into your skull, crushing your cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is what sends messages from one part of your brain to the other. And so swelling in any of these places is a bad thing. So those are the dangers of what can happen. But now let's go back to the original part of the question. 8,000 feet is the altitude where this can start.
Yeah.
The highest mountain in the contiguous United States is Mount Whitney. It's at 14,500 and change. I think 14,550 or somewhere around there. Everest Base Camp is 3,000 feet higher than that. It's at 17,500 feet.
Thank you for suddenly making me feel small with my endeavor. It definitely shifts my perspective.
Is that what you climbed?
Not Whitney, but I did Bearstad in Colorado, right about the same. I think it's about 14.0, maybe 6.5 change.
So there's like 50 plus 14ers in Colorado, and those are no joke. Like, you've been up in there, serious undertakings. People pass away every single year on them. They're lethal conditions. The altitude can cause cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, AMS in anybody. If you go straight from sea level all the way up, you're going to get it. Like, you will get some sort of AMS. Yeah. Now, the way that you climb is you go up slowly. We say climb high and sleep low. And what that means is you go up as high as 3,000, maybe 4,000 feet in one push of elevation in a day. And then you go back down so that your sleeping elevation increases by 1,000 feet on average per day.
Interesting.
And that's above 8,000 feet.
So 2 steps forward, 1 step back every day. 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
That's how you climb mountains. Exactly. That's exactly how you climb mountains. I'm
confounded by that.
Right.
I've never really heard that approach in how you make your way up. Yeah.
So we spend 2 months doing.
And you do it intentionally. I'm getting to the top, and in order to get to the top, 2 up, 1 back.
It's intentional. It's intentional. And So if you go up 3,000 feet in a day,
Yes.
you will shock load your system because your body's going to be trying so hard to produce red blood cells. Red blood cells are what carry the oxygen. So instead of trying to put your body in that shock load state up high, you drop back down where there's thicker oxygen. So you give it a taste of what it needs to create. You go back down and then your body can rest and heal and recover and adapt and change and acclimatize.
Yeah.
Then you continue to move up to where you made it. So you do ladders up and down these mountains. And on Everest, that means you go from base camp at 17,500 up a side mountain called Lobuche to avoid the dangers that are on Everest. You go climb a totally different mountain to prepare for Everest. Yeah, yeah, we did. It's a twofer. So we go up Lobuche, it's at 20,000 feet, come back down to base camp, heal, rest, recover a couple of days. Then we go up to camp 1 and then straight to camp 2 because you got the camp 1 elevation. But you have to go through this dangerous area called the Khumbu Icefall. We're trying to minimize time in there. Get up to Camp 2. Camp 2 is at like 22,000 feet. It's at 21,500, 22,000 feet, depending on the year and where the camp goes and gets placed. Then we go back down to base camp, rest, recover, heal. Then we go up to 23,500 feet, which is on the side of a 45-degree slope called the Lhotse Face, all the way back down. Then finally, for our final, each of these we call a rotation. For the final summit rotation, we go up to Camp 3, Camp 4, stay there for like 6 hours, 8 hours, wait until 7 p.m., then climb up to 29,000.
Wow.
Which just yesterday or 2 days ago got officially new altitude for Everest named. 29,031 feet is the official agreed upon altitude. I got 2 extra feet I didn't know about. I was like, yeah.
Kudos for you for getting the bonus
points a couple years later. Get to the summit, and there the oxygen is 1/3 of the air that you're breathing right now. I mean, if you can imagine Shaquille O'Neal standing on your chest while you're trying to breathe through a straw, that's what it feels like trying to get air. You've got an oxygen mask on. All of your skin is completely covered. Otherwise, it will freeze within 3 to 5 minutes. Any finger, any cheek that's coming out of your mask, any bit of your nose will be frostbitten and have to be cut off. And you're seeing the sunrise over Tibet and China while you see the shadow of Mount Everest cast for dozens of miles out in the distance over these mountains that are 20,000 feet tall, 6,000 feet taller than now, like the mountains I trained on in the U.S. And you're going, oh my gosh, I'm up here. It's an amazing moment.
That has to be such a monumental shift in mindset, knowing that you're progressing up, only to have to slide back down, to progress up, to slide back down, to progress back up.
There's no sliding. We're not on our butts.
So often we're driven to just, moving back and forth, that theoretical slide, that theoretical 2 steps forward, 1 back.
Yeah.
How counterintuitive does that feel?
There's a lot of griping and moaning and bitching about it when it comes to that I am certainly guilty of for novice, when you're a novice and amateur climber.
Yes.
I find that more experienced climbers love that second go around because they know the route, and that frees them up to catch other items of beauty, other things that they missed the first time because they were in the struggle, they were in the navigation, they were in the kind of like, whoa, look at this. Well, then really experienced climbers have found the beauty in that second go around, much like to read a book a second time. We'll pick up different things. And if you can sit at peace and be like, instead of saying, oh, I'm bored reading this book again, say, what did I miss the first time? What are the gems the author was trying to get across that I wasn't there for? I mean, here you are in the book of creation. You're in all of nature. Like, what did God or the creator or nature or evolution, whatever you want to call it, what did it put here that I missed the first time? If you can go in with that approach, those second laps to me are more enjoyable than the first time around.
That's so cool to look at. So cool to look at. It's typical of many of the journeys we take in life. Sometimes that blessing, that gratitude of having that second go around changes and shifts our perspective, forms an entirely different experience.
Or if you're on a run in the morning, if that's your thing, you wake up and go on the same 2-mile lap or 1-mile lap to warm yourself up. What have you been missing all these years? If you go for a walk, what have you been missing? What's new in your neighbor's yards? If you have the same morning commute drive, what's the sky doing today that it wasn't previously? What are the new construction projects, and like, how are you excited for them instead of annoyed by them? Like, how are you cheering them on in spirit? Like, what new buildings have gone up, or what places have gone out of business that are your friends that you may need to reach out to, your community? How can you support? Like, it's always changing. And on those additional laps, what are the additional pieces that you can pick up that you missed before?
That reminds me of another great passage. Big on quotes. Okay, I'm gonna throw it in there.
Drop it like it's hot.
The traveler sees simply what he sees. The tourist sees what he came to see. What part of the journey are we choosing to focus on? Are we simply traveling through life, seeing what we think we see, often stumbling to actually see the amazement and wonder around it?
I've been to 67 countries, mostly as a backpacker. And when I started, I was the traveler. And I would, I'm in London. There's Big Ben. I'm going to stand next to it and get a photograph. I'm in Thailand. I'm going to go to this temple and get a picture. Cheek. Yes, I did it. And the more I saw these places, I would find I was doing the same thing. I'd get to that place, get the photo, move on. And I would kind of find a repetitiveness in this that I wanted to see what more is there. And then I became, I was a tourist to start with. I misspoke there. I was a tourist. Then I became the traveler. The traveler is exactly what that quote says. The traveler is the one who shows up with a completely open mind, a completely open heart, and asks, what's going on here? Let's take a look. Without any expectations, without bringing any of your own culture or your own judgment to it, unless it's a person who leaves a cup on the side of the road. You can judge that all you want. That's the exception. But without this sense of this should be the way my imagination says it should be, versus I want to be open to what is.
Yeah. Are we setting out with a vision to make the journey worthy of the trip?
That's a huge shift.
Filling it with awesome scrapbook-worthy visions of our memory and the experience.
I mean, that's a wonderful thing to do. You can go with an intention of, here's the thing I'd like to get out of this, just like a person going to a yoga mat will say, this is my intention. I'm a yogi, and oftentimes I'll set an intention, and then by the end of the practice, and I go to these like hot yoga classes, they're totally exhausting. I'm dripping with sweat. And at the end of it,
you're not so hot by the end of it because you're dripping in sweat and covered in mess.
Oh, your body adapts and figures, but it's definitely a mess. But
that might be debatable. That might be hot for somebody. I don't know. There again, am I passing a judgment? Am I being biased?
You haven't seen me drip sweat, man. There would be judgment coming from me. Be like, dude, that guy makes lakes. But the same thing happens with traveling or anything in life as on an hour and a half on a hot yoga mat, is you can go in with your one intention, but if you're not open to what may change or what may come, or be able to drop that intention entirely, then you're traveling with too bullheaded of a mindset saying, I have to get this thing out that I've set out to get. Many times in climbing mountains, I've not reached summits. I've failed. Aconcagua is a perfect example, the tallest mountain in South America. My intent was to reach the summit the first time. Well, a gentleman who was a friend of ours that we met on the way in fell and passed away. And then we were dealing with a body recovery for a few days. And then a storm came and killed 3 additional climbers, shutting down the whole mountain. And then we ran out of food and fuel. 2 years later, I returned, and I wasn't physically fit enough because I'd been working so hard. I spent a month and a half training, went back up, got pulmonary edema, went back down, and it was 4.5 years after the original attempt that I finally returned. 4 attempts later, finally reached the summit, and I learned way more from that mountain and way more about myself because the original intent wasn't fulfilled in the first go-round.
Yes. There has to be such a sense of discomfort in that, discontent that, you didn't meet your original goal.
Yeah.
Do you relate to it from that perspective?
I think that discomfort is way more compelling to humans than a vision of a beautiful future.
That's odd to me sometimes how we are so conditioned to that.
I know. It sucks.
We grow by discomfort, supposedly. Are we trained some of those things? We're propelled, I think, internally, because it can be a fight to just stay alive sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
There is that whole notion of we have to do a little work to do some of those things.
What's interesting right now is that I think more people are in discomfort this year. At the end of 2020 is when we're recording this. than maybe in the last decade before, or maybe even in the lifetime that many people have been alive who are listening to this. But I'm also seeing a greater sense of spiritual awareness, of personal growth, of people who are willing to step up and change, of those who are willing to improve their communities, improve themselves first, to stop worrying about changing the entirety of the world and let me help people who are across the continent. Instead, let's just help our community. And I mean, that goes right back to what any great leader of change has said. You start changing the world by first changing yourself. And I'm seeing all of this growth happen. And yes, the pain of this year sucks. It's awful. But it has its silver lining. It has its bright side of, look at all this beautiful growth that's happening in so many people.
There are so many different ways we can each look at that. Therein lies the entirety of its beauty to me. There are so many different ways we can each experience life. We can each express life and share that life with each other. There are also so many different ways we can trip ourselves and fall down that mountain. When we fall down that mountain, are we picking ourselves back up and making that new ascension?
In mountaineering, you're always tied to a rope team. If you're on a big glacier like on Everest. And a lot of picking yourself back up involves having a quality team.
Yes.
And if you fall, you're tied to those people. You can pull them in if you've chosen the wrong team members. So if I'm ever asked to give advice, my first bit of advice in climbing a mountain or any mountain in life is to choose the right teammates. Choose teammates who will respect your boundaries, who are a blast to be with, who are technically competent, and teammates who don't have summit fever. They're willing to adapt and change. If you can find people in your life who meet those qualities, keep them around. Because that means if you happen to fall, they'll be able to stop your fall. But an incompetent team member will get sucked down into that crevasse or down that mountain falling with you. And then vice versa. You have to be those things for another person. You have to respect other people's boundaries. You have to know when it's time to say, this isn't the right time to summit. You have to be able to be a blast to be around and be technically competent so that if the people who are in your world, your tribe, your family, your team members fall, you can stop their fall and not get sucked into the holes and the crevasses with them.
That brings me back once again to another great quote. We're playing philosophers today.
Yeah, we are.
Quoting the philosophers. I should say, quote the philosophers. Pride is concerned with who is right. Humility is concerned in what is right. So often we can get misguided, misaligned. How do you feel we correct the course of our what? Or what is right?
Can you read that again for me? I think that there's depth in there that I need to get deeper into.
Reading that again. Pride, the action of pride, is concerned with the who is right. Humility is concerned in what is right. It's finding that balance. Illustrated through those climbs together, you're working with the team. Someone struggles, someone falls, Are we concerned with the who falls, why they fall? Or are we concerned with the what, the humility of getting to that goal, working together?
Let's pull them out of the hole and get them moving again and put some hot soup in them.
Relating to that, let's relate the question directly to that experience. What becomes the rightness, the answer that corrects things that gets you further along on your journey? What are the main components?
There was a fight that broke out the year that I was on Everest between locals and some gentlemen who wanted to climb the mountain unassisted. And I mean, you're in a foreign country, you're climbing a mountain that belongs to these, in my opinion, these people, the Sherpa who were there. And so to disrespect their ways and their culture, in my opinion, was out of line. But that's me thinking, who is right? What is right is that everybody is safe on the mountain, that tensions drop, and that everybody continues along with a successful season. And I got sucked into this. These Westerners showing up and screwing with the way of the Sherpa. This isn't right. And the Sherpa were the ones who stepped up and said, you know what? It's gone, it's past, doesn't matter. We're going to move on and we're going to climb this mountain and it's going to be peaceful. And that was a great lesson in humility because I wasn't the one offended. I wasn't the one who was wronged. They were.
Yeah.
And for them to have the humble warrior approach and go towards the what is right was a lesson that I'll never forget.
Today's episode is sponsored by Anchor.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's your free platform for podcasting. Anchor has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So it's super easy to create your own podcast. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started sharing your story with the world.
You speak in your book for young men about a passage out of the Tai Ching. Because he believes in himself, he doesn't try to convince others. Because he is content with himself, he doesn't seek approval. Because he accepts himself, the whole world accepts him. In short, to thy own self be true, self-aware, yet not self-centered. Just to know yourself, be yourself, then be selfless in your service to others, correct?
Absolutely.
I love that quote. Let's look a little bit. You are the author of a book, as I mentioned, for young men called The Warrior Challenge, 8 Quests for Boys to Grow with Kindness, Courage, and Grit. Let's look at that book a little bit. Give us a little outline. What inspired you to write that book?
Climbing all these mountains, the tallest mountain on every continent, was a rite of passage for me. It was my own self-imposed journey from boyhood to manhood. And it was a 9-year journey. And you hear all these people today complaining like, oh, there's all these man boys in the world. And I mean, men and women both, you hear complaining about this. Like there's like 30 or 40-year-old dudes who are still boys in men's shells who haven't grown up. And I think that I would have been one of those as well had I not gone on this self-imposed rite of passage. Now, if you look back in cultures before the industrial era, almost every culture had some sort of initiation process. Hunt a lion, become a man. Jump out of a tree with vines tied to your legs, become a man in your culture. Go into like the Australian outback as an Aboriginal and survive for 6 months on your own, and that's what deems you a man. Well, all of these things were meant to protect that tribe. If you could defend from a lion, if you could get up in trees and hunt the food, or if you could get out in the wilderness and face every danger that was there, you can handle yourself and look after your people. I think we lost that. And that was my overall intent for writing this book was let me create a rite of passage that teaches the values, the traits, the principles that in today's world raise a young man to be competent, able to look after himself, which is what the first 3 chapters of the book cover. Self-mastery or weapons mastery is what I use in warrior language. And then armor upgrades is the second part. And that's how do you look after your tribe, your people? How do you interact with others? And then the last part of the book is battleground selection. That's what is your purpose? How do you define what your mission in life is? And these are all like each of these chapters has a figurehead of the most crazy, like awesome adventurer you've ever, some insane stories like guys escaping from communist countries and prisons, or rock climbing in Yosemite, jumping over the Great Wall of China, or escaping the Confederate South on a warship as a pirate. These are some gnarly stories.
What boy isn't drawn to those types of scenarios and stories?
Well, like every religious text ever has used stories for a reason. Put religion completely aside, stories are what get into our psyches and our minds. So parents, when they read this with their kids, can say, instead of like, you should be more resilient, or you need to learn to set boundaries, or you need to be self-aware. Instead of any of that, it's, hey, what would Danny Way do in this scenario? The guy who jumped over the Great Wall of China. Or what would Dennis Hollenbeck do, who was off-road racing in Mexico? What would he do in setting values in this situation? What's the right value to bring to this moment right now? And so like parents are able to point to these heroes that the boys know about and just instinctually feel what that guy's great accomplishment was.
And then how do we take those great values and then form the values of our own. What examples are we living by?
There's an exercise in the book to create your warrior creed. And so I'm not here saying these are the values that a young man should live by. I'm saying here's a bunch of options. Think about what your family's options are. Think about the organizations that you grew up in, your school's options, and then form your own warrior creed, which is your battle statement. It's like, here's how I exist in the world, and these are the values I choose to live by. It's way more powerful than some author saying, you need to be kind. That's not what this book is. This book is, here are great ways to live. Here are great examples. You choose your own definition of what a great warrior is.
That has great power and weight. There again, because he believes in himself.
Yes.
Doesn't try to convince others.
Yes.
Because he is content with himself. He doesn't seek approval, but he does seek to create a value that is worthy. Because he accepts himself, the whole world simply accepts him or her or they, whatever pronoun. We're not forming biases today. Whatever your personal preference is, how you identify in life, carry that with the value that brings you value and meaning.
And what's crazy is I wrote this book so that there would be just as much depth for adults reading it as kids. I wanted it to be something that would be like something that you could read multiple times and get different things from it over different ages. A lot like reading The Alchemist was my intent in writing this. And the fact that we're talking about, I'm 38, I don't know how you're 50, something like the fact that I'm like getting chills over you reading this quote and like, oh my gosh, look at how it ties together. I didn't see that angle previously. I wanted to give that depth, but also make it so fun and action oriented that a kid could go through it and get what he needs or she needs from his or her life.
There again, as we're climbing up and down these mountains, experiencing these grand journeys of life, don't forget to take the time to tap someone else on the shoulder, not tell them what they should see, but say, hey, there's something over there worthy. Hey, look at what I see. Not, hey, you should see this. Just simply, hey, there's something to experience here.
I do want to talk about this, that what you brought up is a great point of the gendered. And this book was a very difficult decision. Do we make this a quest for kids to grow up with kindness, courage, and grit, or specific to young men? And the reason it ended up being chosen as directed towards young men, I mean, anybody can read this. Girls can read it, moms can read it. And they're going to learn a lot about the male psyche and a lot about themselves too. I mean, most lessons are for everybody, but there are specifics that are related. Because guys go through a different set of cultural conditioning, there needs to be a different message or a different healing for some of the negative messages that guys get about what it is to be a man. There's a lot of like, you have to grit through the pain and never express it to anybody. I think that's a destructive message. I don't think girls get it in the same way.
I think I may have set that up with a little disservice to you without going down that road. So I thank you for shining that light back that, yes, throughout the book, we are addressing that. We are guiding that from the perspective that there again, we're not trying to reinforce those biases. We're merely saying as a condition of. So thank you for that.
Yes. I have so many moms writing me messages saying, thank you so much. So many resources exist for girls, but there's literally nothing out there for my boys. And they're saying, this is what we've wanted all along. This is amazing. I wish there were more things out there like this. And those are such touching messages to get from those who read the book, get what's in it, see that it's about fighting against the negative messages that young men get. And I think that any of the criticism that there's been about, oh, this is sexist, this is just for guys, but not girls. John Beede's a jerk for doing that. Those are generally people who haven't read the book, because you'll see that there's honor given towards deep, heavy amounts of honor given towards women and the feminine and how men can interact and relate to and respect that.
That's such an honorable and noble approach. Are we taking the time to look around and say there are different potentials, there are different paths? Sometimes we have to focus that vision on a specific path. So there again, I nod my hat to you. Where do we take those paths then and make our own path in life? Do we follow the same trails through life, or do we take that another step and blaze our own trail? Now, speaking to that, one more thing. I'm sorry, I cut you. I'm a let me squeeze this in real quick.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Vulnerability often shows us what it means to simply be courageous. A quiet ego is a quiet courage. Going back to our lion stories, the loudest lion never roars. And that's okay. He's still a lion.
No, I'm so glad you shut me up because those are awesome.
Take you too far off your path.
No, it was a deserved cutoff, and I'm so glad that you got those in.
Shut you up. That was kind of a cutoff. So,
and I loved that the last one was the loudest lion is the quiet lion, and I was the one trying to
get. Wait a minute, I'm going to hog this moment back because I was about 3/4 of the path. I took that entirely this morning from those great passages from the book, and I'm thinking about this and thinking, I see what he's trying to say here to me as I relate to it, or I have a vision about this. I have a vision that, we're creating a lot of these things, but we also have to, as you mentioned, go back and look at some of those other angles. And that to me was like what I'm taking from this is, we have to build that lion. We so often hear of that courage of the lion. But is it always the loudest lion that's leading the pack?
Your statement about the path, I think that there is respect in following the path and not forging your own. When you come to a fork in the road, take the trail less traveled and forge your own path and don't go on the path before you. Well, if everybody does that, the entirety of nature is going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
I think it's really beautiful to follow the trail that's been put in front of you, to learn from those who've come before you, follow their steps up until the trail ends, and then push forward, forging the continuation of the path. To say I'm just going to go off in my own direction is negating and shirking everything that's gone before you, and it's the opposite of that quiet lion. It's arrogant. It is not humble to say I'm going to go forge my own path and screw what's been come before me. Learn from, grow from, piggyback on, and then leapfrog over those who have finished their trail work and then create your own path beyond that. I think that's a much more respectful, humble, and noble approach to trail work.
Yes.
When it comes to that lion, there's a girl I'd like to tell you about. Her name's Raina. She's the quietest warrior that I know. And I just did this yoga instructor training. And she crushes it. She's got every pose perfect. She's like never taking a break, never sipping water, never leaving the room when it's 100 and something degrees in there. And you would never know it unless you stopped and paid attention, because she's not like flashing herself in the mirror. She's not coming in with clothes that are like, oh, look at me. She just owns it and doesn't need the approval of anybody.
Yes.
And she's the most powerful of any of us. And we were all pretty strong yogis. And that is the real life example of how that humble lion roars in real life.
Thanks for bringing that amazing story and connecting those dots. How are we all being humble lions?
Of course.
Are we showing that courage and vulnerability? What paths are we following through life? What paths are we being guided towards? I love this. I love when I get a conversation that makes me stop and consider, where are my own biases? Where is my view? Where do I need to follow the journey and open my eyes? And share that journey. So thank you for sharing that journey with us today.
We didn't get into this vulnerability thing. By the way, you're welcome. Thanks for opening up the conversation.
You are welcome also. And very, very much, I am grateful. Very much. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. I think that's a whole nother mountain we could climb at another time.
I was chatting with a friend who said, what's your definition of vulnerability? And I went to the expression of pain as something that guys typically don't do. Like, this hurts. We want to either bottle it up, numb it, tough it out, or even nice it out. We'll put on a face, a front that we think people will like. We'll be people pleasers in an effort to cover up our pain. And she kind of stopped and reframed the whole concept of vulnerability, which you defined as courageous, and it is. And that's a good thing to do. But she said, what about expressing love freely? What about expressing joy freely, or like hooting and hollering when you're happy, or singing like, yeah, exactly. Like that was a vulnerable, courageous moment right there. Like sometimes I want to let out a woohoo and I'm like, oh, what would people think? I'll look like a fool. I'll be an idiot or like my voice will crack. That little woohoo, that is a moment of vulnerability and courage that I think everybody can learn from as well. So I want to pass on her lesson and say that vulnerability can be the courageous expression of what hurts, but it can also be the courageous expression of your deepest joy.
I'm going to sit with that one for a second. I'm going to sit with that. That is such a great expression, such a great moment for us to kind of sit with here at the end of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
How are we truly aligning with courage? And I'm going to leave that for a thought to ponder. We'll leave a thought to ponder today. How are we truly being courageous in our lives? And where are we allowing that vulnerability to guide us toward our most courageous moments? Where can we go and find you to follow you on all these adventures and journeys?
If you want to follow all the mountains that I've climbed, I'm creating documentaries about all of them. I'm also climbing mountains now and giving motivational speeches from mountaintops with like this drone flying around me.
Awesome.
And all that you can find at johnbeede.com, JOHNBEEDE.com to get a copy of the Warrior Challenge. If there's a young man in your life, your son, grandson, nephew, some kid down the street, if you want to donate some to a scout troop or to your church or your religious organization for the young men there or the girls are loving it too. Go to Amazon and type in The Warrior Challenge. Go there right now.
Awesome.
The Warrior Challenge, you're looking for the bright red cover. Order your copies and come on over to the website, johnbeede.com, and say hi to me over there.
You can also reach out to you as a speaker.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks for that too. Yep. Anybody who's looking for a speaker.
Share some of these great stories. I've seen some of these talks you give. Go out and check them out. Definitely very motivational. Definitely very insightful.
I speak for corporate groups as well as youth groups, and I teach grit and resilience and goal setting in these. I used to do big, huge audiences and keynote settings. Now I'm doing virtual keynotes. So whatever time it is that you're listening to this in history, if we're out being live, then bring me to your live event. And if we're still at home, then I'd be happy to create a mountaintop virtual keynote experience for your people.
You are such a fun storyteller. I would encourage everyone to reach out and let John be a part of that story. I want to thank you again. This has been such a fun conversation. I'd love to do this again soon.
Likewise, Jeff. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I truly appreciate you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too. Chinese philosopher Confucius shared this observation. Life is really simple, yet we insist on making it complicated. And he went on to add, it doesn't matter how slowly you go, as long as you do not stop. We hear it all the time. Every journey starts with a single step. And as we launch into this new year, often those journeys can feel like moving mountains. But the man who moves mountains begins by carrying away a small step. How we set our intentions often determines the results gained in life. And a fresh perspective can, and often will, give us a new appreciation and perspective. Thank you for tuning into this podcast with John Beede. We are grateful for your support, and we are grateful for John for sharing his awesome experiences and insights. If you believe in what we do, please leave us a review. You can visit the website at www.thelightinside.us to sign up for our mailing list, to get previews of upcoming episodes, or to gain additional insights from our guests. Follow us on social media at The Light Inside Podcast. This has been show number 1 of our 2021 season. Stay tuned as we head into this new year, sharing our mission to empower you by sharing transformational experiences, allowing us all to evolve as human beings. We'll see you again next week on The Light Inside.